Director of Applied Behavioral Learning Strategies, and just an extraordinary and very dedicated expert in terms of providing ABA services, is here tonight to talk with us. For those of you who haven't joined us, these are weekly chats. We're designed to be relatively short. They're now 45 minutes to provide information to families who we know are just dealing with unbelievably stressful challenges right now during this pandemic, with schools closed and services stopped. There's just a few logistics. There's a chat button on the bottom, and that's a great place to be asking your questions. And Lilia will be facilitating the questions at different points of the presentation. Joanne Pino from our office is here as well. We will be recording, so we can put this on our website later. Anything I'm forgetting, Lilia?
Nope, that's it.
Great, so welcome, and I'm thrilled to turn this over to Mariela.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today, virtually. So yeah, so schools are closed, and now we know they're going to be closed until September. So this has been obviously very hard for all families, but for families of children with special needs, it's been particularly difficult. So the good news is all insurance companies have approved ABA via telehealth. So you do have an option if you have ABA services, to have them be live in your home or have them be remotely. So many companies are still providing home services, including ABLES. Most companies have closed center-based services just to increase social distancing. But you do have a choice between having still your therapist come to your home, or a new therapist, or have sessions done remotely. For a number of reasons, some families have selected to do remote. I have some families that are in the front lines. They're doctors and nurses, and they actually have been concerned about, infecting us, their therapists. So they have declined live services, but we're providing remote services to as many families as we can. And I have to be honest, it has been very, very difficult. So I've been doing this for 30 years, and it's just almost starting all over again, even with children that I know very well. So it has been hard for us to work with children that we've known for a number of years, that we know the families, that we know their learning style. And it has been even harder for children that we don't know very well, or very young children. So telehealth definitely has its challenges. Now, obviously, I'm going to show you the things, I have some examples, and I want to show you the things that have worked as opposed to the things that haven't worked. Because we all have children that are regressing. Some children, I have some children that were doing beautifully, fully included, and the autism is seeping right back in. Behaviors that we hadn't seen in the past. Intense passions that are not developmentally appropriate, just because they don't have the structure of school, they don't have the play dates, they don't have all the extracurricular activities that provide that social stimulation. So when that void appears, then the behaviors and the special interests and the passions seep in. And some of them are, you can shape them, you can work with them. Some of them are problematic. So and regardless, they take away time from learning and social interaction, which is already limited because we're all, socially distancing. So now, what kind of services can be done remotely? Pretty much everything. So we can do an initial assessment. We can do a skills assessment. We can also do functional behavior assessments, and I'm going to talk more about this at the end. This is a wonderful opportunity to do consultation to the parents because you are the ones that are there with your children every day. And this is always the case. But when school is open, you have 6 hours a day where the child is at school. Now it's just, it's the family 24/7. And one important thing to realize is that when we talk about parent consult, it doesn't necessarily have to be to the parents. It can be to whoever is taking care of that child. Because if you have a very young child or a child that is nonverbal, that might be older but still needs 24/7 supervision, somebody is taking care of that child. And that person functions as a parent for parent consult purposes. So we can provide consult to anybody that's taking care of your child. And this consultation can be done individually, like it's always been. And it's actually convenient to do it remotely in many ways. This wasn't allowed before, but it's actually convenient to do it on the phone or through Zoom, as opposed to that traditional home visit that we used to do, 10, 20 years ago. And then the other modality that we are allowed to do remotely is group consultation. So there are some families that have chosen to participate in group meetings, and what we're doing is we're training parents as a group, and it's also a source of support and ideas from other parents, because nobody really knows your situation as well as somebody that's going through the same situation or similar. And then we can also work directly with a behavior technician. And this, I'm going to show you a little example of this. It's very hard to do direct remote work. It has to be, a child that has particular prerequisites, some levels of compliance, that will be able to sit in front of a screen for a period of time. And also the ability to understand that it's still you that's behind the screen. There are some children that just don't understand that you are, you are a person there, and that he's supposed to respond to you through Zoom. So that's, a separate set of skills. And if you don't have certain joint attention, it's going to be very hard to participate in a Zoom meeting. But I'm going to show you an example of a situation, a couple of kids that can do it, have been able to do it. And then we can also do virtual social skills. And this has actually been, it's been fun to do social skills groups through Zoom. And the most important thing is to make sure that just like any other session in social skills, you don't do, 45 minutes of, lesson social skills, practicing, commenting and questioning, conversation skills and all that. You always have a time at the end to do fun things. So the social skills lessons are fairly easy to do remotely. What has been more challenging is finding fun things to do at the end. So that's where, you have to become a little bit creative in terms of how to reinforce the children that are cooperating at the end of the session. So one of the things that we've learned, for example, is that kids love to be the host. So one of the things that we have been doing through Zoom is delivering tokens or through chat, and have them earn points, and whoever earns points first, say 5 points first, gets to be the host. And they, the older children seem to enjoy that. But yeah, so also just remembering that when you change things, the therapist needs to start pairing themselves with fun things and reinforcement as well, and not just assume that you can just, jump right where you left off before school closed. So we talked a little bit about number of hours. It depends on the treatment plan or the IEP. And then let's just jump right into how to work with toddlers and preschoolers. So the little babies are the ones that obviously have the hardest, the most difficult time understanding the whole remote delivery of services. And then many times it ends up being parent consult for the very, very young ones. And also one of the things that we've been doing is having the parents be the hands of the therapist. So the therapist delivers the instruction and sometimes provides a reinforcement, and then the child prompts the child or helps him or her get the correct response. So this is a little video of an extremely dedicated father who's spending, not that everybody has the ability to do this, but this particular dad is spending 4 to 6 hours a day with his daughter. And interestingly, she's doing beautifully. She's making so much progress. And he's not in the field. He's never done this before, but he's learned.
Who's this? Then you can just say, oh, good. Yes. Who's this? Yes. Who's this? Yes. Who's this? Yeah. Who's this? Hannah.
So we are zooming in, both the therapist and me, and we are just giving him some feedback because he's never done this before. He's the newest therapist. And then what we're doing is he delivers the instruction, he provides the prompt, and then the therapist collects it and graphs the data and tells him what to do next. It's like, oh, we are all set with family ID, let's move on to colors or numbers or whatever we're doing. So yeah, so that is one of the and one of the ways to do this, to do it through the family, through the parents. And really what's most important is for him to really provide the prompt, because we can even provide the instruction remotely, but there needs to be somebody prompting the child and bridging, that gap between the incorrect and the correct response. And how do we do that? By physically prompting or giving the correct verbal response. So say if she got everything right in the little segment that I showed you, but if she wasn't able to identify her therapist, then he would have said, who is this? Oh, it's Hannah. It's Hannah, your therapist. And that is
gonna go ahead, finish. I'm going to take a break for questions in a minute. We've got a lot.
This is actually, this is a good time if you want to do that.
Okay. We have a couple of polls that I'm going to launch now for people to answer. There's some questions about regression. Watch that. Thank you, Mariela. The first question is, how many agencies in general provide home ABA services? And of those, how many are coming into homes? I've heard anecdotally, but I'm curious about specific numbers. Not sure if you know.
I know my own, and I know a handful, several other companies. I'm not sure. I really don't know who is, like, out of all the ABA companies, but one good place to start is who was providing services before. If you were receiving services, who was providing them, and are they still providing them? So I wouldn't know exactly how many, but I do know several. Like, we are definitely going to the homes.
Julia, you're muted. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, one place to contact to get an answer to that, and Joanne, maybe you can put that into the Zoom chat, is the Autism Insurance Resource Center, because they may have data on which programs are currently going in-home and in addition to providing remote services. Thanks, Joanne.
Or also the Mass Health website. So in the website, you're supposed to update. So if you're not providing services, you should not be listed anymore or not accepting new patients.
It looks like 64% of our respondents are saying no to is your child receiving required ABA services. So I wanted to let everyone know that. Okay, next question. I'm having problems getting our ABA provider to come into the house. Remote simply doesn't work for nonverbal kids who have a hard time concentrating. Do you have any advice?
Well, I would say if we're all having, staffing has been a nightmare. It's usually challenging, but every week people's circumstances change. So we have therapists that say, oh yeah, I want to go to the home. Here I go, I get started, and then the brother was exposed to someone, and then we have to quarantine, and so it's been very challenging. But I would say put yourself in several waiting lists and contact agencies and let them know, ask them more or less what the estimate is, how long will it be? We are hiring new people, and so we have some therapists that will have elected not to go to the homes, and obviously we can't, require them to. So, but then we've hired new people that are willing and able to go to the homes, and we're using protective equipment, and we are limiting the number of homes, so to 2 at most. But my suggestion would be, if your company doesn't want to come to your home, then find another company. Because I agree that with very young children or nonverbal children, if a child cannot sit in front of a Zoom meeting for half an hour at least, or 45 minutes, you can't do all remote. You may be able to do the supervision remotely, but not the direct.
Next question, is teletherapy allowed just during the pandemic, or is it allowed for BCBAs all the time?
Some insurance companies already allowed the BCBA, the supervision, to be done remotely. But now all insurance companies are allowing all services to be done remotely.
But it's
going to change, we don't know.
Well, my understanding is that what the state approved for telehealth generally is for during the pandemic. I don't think we can assume that, it's part of the emergency orders. So at least that's my understanding, is that we can't assume it will continue after.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the next question is, does the school district have to provide parent support or training?
I think, Julia, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I think that's a very good question. I think there's 2 pieces of an answer to that question. One is, it's very clear that school districts are required, the IEP is still in effect, and so if parent training and parent consultation is in the IEP, then that's very clear that that's something that the school district needs to be addressing and providing to the extent that's possible with the schools being closed. So if that's something that's in your child's IEP, that's absolutely something that's important to raise with the school district if it's not currently being provided. I think there's another piece of that legally, is everything is very different right now. So if your current IEP doesn't have parent training or consultation in the IEP, but your child is not able to access the ABA services that are necessary because of school being closed, then I think legally you still have a right to say that your child cannot access the services that they require without some parent training and parent support. And all the guidance from the State Department of Education has emphasized repeatedly how critical it is for schools to be reaching out to families and providing them with the support they need, because families have so much responsibility right now. So I think there's 2 different ways legally that that can be approached. And the thing that we say repeatedly is, what's most important is for the school districts to hear from you, in writing, as always, in an email, what it is that your child, what your biggest concerns are, and what you believe your child needs to be able to access these services that are so vital, and to work creatively about how to do that. If you run into roadblocks, there are certainly next steps that you can take, or we'll provide the information for our helpline as well in the chat box.
Yep, we can throw that in there now. All right, thank you, everyone.
Great. So I showed you discrete trial teaching, traditional discrete trials, and then here is structured teaching, which I think is incredibly important right now, because there are many times, one of the problems with children that have had one-to-one services for a while is that they become accustomed to having a therapist or a teacher haranguing them every step of the way, and then many times they don't do what they know how to do independently. So structured teaching basically requires pre-trained tasks. So, and I obviously have permission from the family to show this video. This is one of my students. And this is very, very easy for him, what he's doing right now. But the point is for him to do it all by himself. So these are things that he knows how to do. but we want him to occupy his time in something productive without prompting and reinforcement from the teacher. So we only reinforce at the very end when he's done with his 3 bins. And he has to do everything and then put it away. So that's the whole, so this I think is very important. If this wasn't part of your child's program, I think it's a very important skill to have, because if you think about it, 10 minutes, if we can get them to do a pre-trained task for 10 minutes, that's a shower, that a parent can take. So this is a very important part. And then here he is again, and he's working with his therapist in the center before the pandemic. He really loves books, so they're reading stories, and we're using the book as
Let's see. I can take my own bath. Pretty cool, don't you think? He said. What is he doing? He's his hair, threading his hair. He's wetting his hair.
Yeah, so in natural environment teaching, the object of the trial and the reinforcement are the same. So we're using a book to teach him verbs. Now at this,
He's a kid.
now right now it's a little bit harder to do that. So this is a natural environment session through Zoom. And so his therapist is actually in the home, but I am reading a story and I'm asking questions about it. So here it is. The purple, so Don King, the boy who owns the
and I know that elephants are great, but that's a lot of space to color in all by myself. And don't even get me started on your rhinos, hippos, and humpback whales. How tired I am after handling one of those big things. Such big animals. Baby penguins are great, So very tiny.
Harry, elephants are big and baby penguins are? Good job. So you get so there's in YouTube, these are all just YouTube read alouds, and you can have all the, all the classics are all there, and sometimes they're read by actors, so they're really, really good. This one is really, really interesting. So because you can't read, obviously you can't read stories remotely, but you can use the read aloud and then pause it and ask questions about the story the way you would use, you would do before in therapy. So now how about older elementary students and teens? Or do you want to pause for questions about little guys before I move on to the older ones?
We have a couple of questions in general. Yeah, we can do a quick question break. The first one is, can you provide suggestions for how to address ABA needs of children who are nonverbal?
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about children that have no communication skills later when we talk about functional assessment. And yeah, but the reality is remote services for nonverbal children are hard. Because you need to be able to have the attention span to focus on a screen for half an hour, 45 minutes in order to have a session. So if you don't have those attention and executive functioning skills, you didn't have them before the pandemic, it's going to be very hard to learn it now. And it does require some level of abstraction to understand that the screen is a person that's talking. So if say the child did not have those skills right now, and you can't get him to sit and follow, and he's not really understanding in a narrative through a Zoom meeting, then it's going to be much harder, and it's going to be more focused on training the family to do behavior management and work on maintaining those skills that the child had as much as possible. So let's talk a little bit about older elementary students and teens. So one of the things that, all the schools at this point are providing quite a bit of work. The challenge is to get the students to do the work. And then one of the things that I think is true for all the families is that you want to make sure that that the parent has control over the reinforcers, whatever that is. Because most older elementary or teenagers are not going to wake up in the morning, put on their alarms, go to their Zoom meetings, complete all their assignments. That's just, it's wonderful if that's happening, but it's unlikely. So you want to be the person to help them do all those things. And in order to do that, you have to have control over the reinforcers. So what is the child doing all day long? And is he playing with the iPad? Is he just pacing around the house? What is it that's reinforcing for him? And you want to control that and make it contingent upon finishing the work. For most kids, it's electronics. I think even nonverbal kids, they just love their YouTube. They love to scroll down their favorite videos and listen to their favorite songs. So the challenge is to take that electronic that they like and make use of that electronic contingent upon doing the work that they need to be doing, whatever their level is. So for older or higher functioning kids, one of the things that you want to do is help them make a list of assignments. Don't assume that they're going to come up with everything by themselves. Estimate the time, pick which one is easiest, which one has already started, calculate their time. And then assess their energy, how are they feeling, help them assess their mood, and really have a project list with sort of operational next steps that they have to complete. And say if they're waiting for something, saying, oh, my teacher has to send that Zoom invitation, then have that be in a separate list. So then we don't, because that's how things sometimes fall through the cracks when you're waiting for somebody else to do something. And then try to review them once a week. And I have quite a few resources, but and this is just an example of PBS Learning. Pretty much, there's just so much out there, and I have a list at the end. And usually the challenge is not finding educational materials. There's so much out there. This is just a screenshot of everything that you can find about, in the PBS Learning media. The problem is really to get your children to do this and to take control over your reinforcers, so then they actually do the tour of the galaxy, because this might be a wonderful lesson, but if you can't get them to do it, it's just not going to work. And I think it just takes us to the sort of the fantasy of homeschooling, right? The beautifully organized house with a little girl reading by herself, but the reality is, it's very hard to teach your own children. Usually children don't want to be taught by their parents. They want to be taught by their teachers for a number of reasons. I think we've all experienced that. But at this point, we really, there's really not a quick, solution. Many times families ask, can you give us some tips, some like practical things that we can do to address behavioral problems? And the problem is that there is not a magic, solution, like, okay, if you come home and you do this, this is going to happen. We really need a functional behavior assessment that basically is just going to tell us, why is the behavior happening? That's what an FBA is. Why is the behavior happening? Because if we don't know why it's happening, then we won't know what to do to address it. So basically, when we think about motivation of behavior, we think about the four A's, and this comes from Arise Consulting. But what are the 4 reasons children have behavioral problematic behavior? The first one is for attention. So mom and dad are busy with their own work, because many of us still work full time in addition to homeschooling, right? So we're busy doing our own work, and then the child begins to exhibit behaviors because they want the attention of the parent. Now the second A would be access to tangibles. So suppose somebody is having lots of popsicles and then wants to go to the fridge and have one more popsicle, and then you say, no, no more popsicles. You've already had 10, and then they throw a tantrum. So it might be that they're throwing a tantrum because you denied access to that whatever thing that they wanted. Or if, God forbid, you try to take away the iPad, right? And then they start crying and screaming, engaging in self-injurious behavior, and perhaps that's something that they're doing. They're engaging in that behavior because you denied access to something. And then the third one would be avoidance and escape, which is, say, for example, you say, okay, it's time to brush your teeth, and then comes the tantrum and the self-injurious behavior. So it might be that they're engaging in the tantrum and the SIB because they want to avoid what they don't want to do, which in this case might be brushing their teeth or showering. And now without I think the closing of the schools has created in everybody just a lot, losing the routine. It's almost like, what day is it today? Is it Thursday? Like all days are the same. We lost that structure of school. So that has really been very, very difficult for all of our students. Everybody needs that routine, but particularly children with special needs. And the last A is automatic or sensory. And this is the kind of behavior that you're not placing demands, you're not denying access, you're giving attention, and then it just happens again and again and again. And if you just leave the child alone, it will continue, and it will even increase in frequency. So you just leave them alone, and then, but they still happen. So why is it happening? Because, the child or the person likes the sensory consequences of that behavior. So say if somebody's rocking back and forth, it just feels good to them, and that's why they are doing it. Many times, however, it's problematic because you have, say, for example, self-injurious behavior can be automatically reinforced. There are children with autism begin engaging in self-injurious behavior, and the more they do it, then the more they do it, it becomes almost like an addiction. So some serious behaviors, self-injurious behavior can be automatically reinforced by its sensory consequences. So those are, in general, the four things, the four reasons why children might be behaving a particular way. But I think one of the things that we have to remember is that behavior problems are due to behavioral deficits. So every behavior problem is connected to a behavioral deficit. And one of the things that we have to have in every treatment plan or IEP is addressing, what are those behavioral deficits? And we talk about the 2 C's here. One is communication. So if a child cannot express his wants or needs, then you're going to have behavioral problems. That's just going to happen. So communication always needs to be at the forefront of every treatment plan. And well, before the world changed, many times parents would ask me, well, do you think I should send him to school so he has contact with other children? And then maybe he's going to learn how to talk. And my answer was always, language comes first and social skills come second, because if you can't communicate your wants and needs, you can't tell the teacher if you're hungry, if you're thirsty, if you're uncomfortable, then if you're cold, if you're hot, there's no social skills there. Social skills is going to be secondary to communication. And even and if you think about it, it's very hard to make friends when you can't talk. So communication is always at the forefront of every treatment plan for a child with autism. Now, if you have a child that is nonverbal, then that ideally you should have a communication plan if it's an older student. And if it's a little one, really the best strategy that we have to teach children with autism to communicate is discrete trials. Whether that is, talking like you saw our little ones do, our very tiny one with her dad, or using devices. You can still do trials in helping the child communicate and ask for what he wants or needs using his device. And that is it's the most important and the first focus of any treatment plan is communication, just expressing their wants and needs. And then the second C is cooperation. So, and many times the reason why children cannot access all the remote learning materials and activities that their teachers are sending them is because there's a problem with cooperation. And this involves waiting, sharing, accepting no, saying no, it's time to sit for the Zoom meeting, taking away the iPad where you know, and having where he was sort of scrolling through YouTube and watching his favorite videos, and instead of that, sitting in front of a Zoom meeting. So getting the child to cooperate with the work is one of the major objectives, and sometimes you have to take it little by little. So many of our students started with sitting in a Zoom meeting for 5 minutes, and then what we would do would be to play their favorite songs or read their favorite books, and then expanding that a little bit to putting questions and demands. So the one that I showed you where I was reading the crayon book, first we started just reading it with no questions, and then we started pausing it and asking questions, and now we're at the point where it's an expectation that we're going to Zoom for, you know, an hour, and that we have a structure, and that's another important thing, having the same structure every time. So we start with a hello song, then we read a story, then we do some more work, and then we end with a goodbye song. So having that same routine and structure is very important.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions, and I also have one more poll question I wanted to ask.
Sure.
Oh, thank you.
And we have, is there a way to get handouts out? Because there's quite a few websites that provide a lot of resources. But as I said before, I think, you know, these are all readily accessible. I think the problem is getting our children to cooperate with them.
Yes, we'll be sending an email out to registrants tomorrow with a recording of this webinar and other resources. We also just started a new Facebook group at MAC for parents of kids with autism. So I'll share a link to that in the chat box, but that's another way to talk with other parents, and we'll be sharing resources there as well. So just a couple more questions. Thank you, Mariela. Have you noticed an increase or a decrease in students your program serves? I'm curious because a lot of families have parents who are working, so what sorts of creative ways are they engaging to get the services for their child? For some it's too much, but curious to hear the creativity you've seen.
Well, we have a wide range. So some like the dad I showed you, he's putting 4 to 6 hours a day with her baby, with his baby, and she's doing great. Some other families have enlisted family members. So if there's a cousin or an aunt that's taking care of the child, they have been trained. Siblings have been really helpful. They're at home, so they want to help. So families have really stepped in, and it has helped with physical distancing, because some families don't feel comfortable with a therapist coming to their homes, but they have somebody in their home already, or perhaps a neighbor that they feel comfortable with, and then training that person to be the therapist has really been helpful.
Thank you.
I was also just going to add, Jenny Dunkley, a parent and advocate, reminded me to emphasize that, you know, school districts should all be providing remote learning plans for every child who has an IEP with any kind of disability, but certainly every child with autism. So to the extent that you're understanding things from this talk or from your experience that will be important for the school district to provide, if those things are not in the remote learning plan, then those are certainly things that, you know, like we were talking about parent training. If you feel like you or the other family members need some parent training in order to access the services that the school district's trying to provide, that's something that you can request to be included in the remote learning plan. If, as Mariela was talking about, kids may not be at a point where they can sustain for a whole half hour of remote ABA therapy, then you can certainly ask the remote learning plan for these kinds of smaller sessions that Mariela was talking about in order to build up the capacity. I mean, we still have the I of IEP in this novel pandemic situation that nobody's ever experienced before. And so the school districts really have to hear from you how your child's doing. And you can also take videos. If your child's having difficulty accessing the services and instruction that the school's offering, if you're comfortable taking a video and sharing that with the school district, then they have the information and the data to help you problem solve. So they're just all ideas that we've heard that may help. I think what you've been provided and the resources that we'll share are really going to be very helpful, Mariela. Thank you.
And I think one of the important things, just like a BCBA or a behavior therapist would never walk into a house and say, okay, sit down, touch your nose, tell me 3 animals, stand up. So, you always come in and first you play and you pair yourself with reinforcement. And you have your toy bag with the bubbles and all the fun things. So just like initially you have to pair yourself with reinforcement, even if you know the child, you still have to do it again. So my the student that I showed in the center and then with me, I've known this child for 4 years, and he's one of my center-based kids. So I seen him every 5 days a week for 4 years, and still I had to pair myself again, because the first thing he did was close the computer and say goodbye, Mariela. And that's somebody that I know very well. So you have to start first of all pairing yourself and reinforcing what is it that child likes, and then provide it to him. And then you have to make it fun. At the beginning, at least, you have to make it fun, and then start placing the demands. Just like any relationship, you want to start with fun things, and then you start making them do things that they don't want to do. So I think that is key, and having the same routine all the time. What I'm hearing in a lot of Zoom meetings from schools is that it's just the kids talking. And taking turns talking, and that is just not, it's not a lot of fun, because especially young children, they just go on and on about random things. So the one that's not talking is just not going to be entertained there. So it has to be fun, and it can't be just for children with special needs. It can't just be taking turns sharing things and showing things in the camera. That's just not. It has to be entertaining and to them, whatever entertaining to them is.
We've got a parent of a teenager with a question. My daughter keeps telling me that I'm not a teacher, to stop trying to be a teacher. Do you have any tips for how to get her to get over this?
My daughters do the same thing. Like, no, I'm not your teacher. I'm your parent. And guess what? I also have control over your phones. So the choices are, they usually, I'm very fortunate, they don't resist academics. They just resist chores. Like, so you have until 5 o'clock to do your chores, or I'm going to take away your phone. So so control, if you control the reinforcers. So what is it that they want? And the phones, I mean, before the pandemic, they were, a big thing. I call them, they're precious. So if now it's their lifeline to the world. So, so control, if you control the and also just, recognize, yes, I'm not your teacher. I'm sure you misses whatever. I'm trying here, but this is the situation that we have, and we have to do our best. And control the same thing, control the reinforcers, but also try to become reinforcing. And that's, I think it's just important in any relationship. Find something that they enjoy doing, that you can, and make that sort of contingent upon finishing the work. Yeah, it is very hard. It's hard for everyone. They don't want to be taught by their parents. It's just.
Nor do the parents want to be teachers.
Good point. Another question for Mariela: does your organization provide professional development to school districts?
We do, yes. We do. We have pretty much whatever they are interested in. So we do basic ABA, executive functioning, functional behavior assessment. So we definitely are able to do that.
Okay, and we can put a link to the ABLS website in the email going out tomorrow also, if anyone wants to look into that.
Probably only have time for one more question, but before Lilia does that question, I just want to, two things. One, if we haven't had time to get to your question, and you feel free to contact our helpline and we can give you more, hopefully some more answers and assistance in terms of your own child situation. Also, before folks leave, I know we're at time. In the comment section, we'd love to get your input about any next topics for the chats that we're scheduling in the next several weeks. We've had some folks talk about wanting a chat that's more of a question and answer time for families to talk about their legal or advocacy questions. Some folks have asked for something around the transition for 3-year-olds, leaving early intervention. Some folks have asked for things around augmentative alternative communication, assistive technology. You may have other topics in mind, so please share your thoughts in the chat or by emailing Lily about what future topics you'd like. And then Lily's got one more question, and we'll thank Mariela again before we leave.
Yeah, thank you. Last question, if schools provide each child 15 hours per week, are related services considered part of those hours, or should the related services be counted as supplemental to what all students receive?
That's more a question for Julia.
Yeah, that's, I know that the state has given guidance for all students about the, approximate length of time that they should be receiving instruction. I think for kids with disabilities, it's all driven by the IEP. It's not as this amount of time and the services the child needs to be received are based on what's in their IEP and what the district is able to provide, given these circumstances. So it doesn't have that same time frame issue. It's really based on the IEP needs and goals and objectives and services. And so are we wrapping up now, Lilia?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're a few minutes over time, but this has been terrific, Mariela. Thank you so much. It's been really enlightening in terms of what's possible. I think everybody's aware of the issues that you've raised that make it difficult, but it sounds like there's some ways to creatively address how to overcome these barriers. We know this is, as we keep saying every week, this has never been done before. How do we provide all these services remotely for such a long time when we're just figuring it out as we go? You've clearly been at the forefront of kind of figuring out strategies that are effective, and we can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge with all the parents and others who are here tonight. So thank you.
Oh,
Really
thank you
appreciate all you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks all of you for joining us when I'm sure there's a lot of other things that might be more enjoyable to do when you finally get to 9 o'clock at night. So we really appreciate your participation and your commitment to your kids and all the other kids that you're working with. So have a good evening.
Bye. Thank you.
And
Bye.
please give us information about what you might like going forward in the future as you sign off for the evening.